We are here today to celebrate the publication of Two Bugs on Bikes by Jacqui Webster. I'm Jacqui's publisher, Jessica Mutter, and I am the founder of Hembury Books. I'm going to start by reading out Jacqui's bio, and then we're going to jump into the questions. Jacqui Webster grew up on a farm in Yorkshire, England, and is a public health advocate who is passionate about improving food systems. Jacqui always wanted to be a writer. Still, it wasn't until she traded her beach house and job as a public health professor in Sydney for a bicycle and an adventure across 2 continents that she wrote her first book, Two Bugs on Bikes. Congratulations, Jacqui. You had the most sensational launch last night. How are you feeling?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. It was really amazing, and particularly to see so many sort of friends, family and work colleagues there. And it was a really fabulous evening.
It was. People were, I got there at about 6:15 and there were probably about 40 people there, and they just kept coming and coming and coming to the point that there was standing room at the back. Then there was standing room just along the sides. It was just like, it was heaving, like maybe 100 people.
Yeah, I think there was 100 people, and I think I knew at least 90 of them. So it was really fabulous. And I think Better Read Than Dead did a really good job hosting. It was a great place to have the event, and we really enjoyed it. Gary Maddox was sensational as always. So yeah, it was a really good event. Thanks.
Yeah, it was so happy. Could you please tell viewers about your book?
For sure, happy to talk about it. So the book really is about a 1-year bicycle trip that my partner Joe McNamara and I took in March 2023 till March 2024. So the idea for the trip was really Joe's. We decided to take a year off work and leave behind our jobs and houses and friends and family and go on this adventure. I was a little bit nervous about this. I was pretty comfortable in my life at 51. I didn't really feel the need. I traveled a lot when I was younger, and I was like, why now? But Joe really wanted to do this, and I always follow Joe wherever he goes. So I didn't want to be left behind while he had the fun. So I followed him. And so the original idea was to cycle from Selby, and we were up on a farm in Yorkshire to Singapore, but we ended up starting in March, and it was too cold in England. So instead we started in Morocco. We did a loop in Morocco over the Atlas Mountains, and then up into Spain, took the ferry across to Spain, and then cycled through Spain, France and Italy, into Slovenia, and then across the Balkans, and got as far as Turkey really before we got a bit stuck. We couldn't get visas for China without going back to Australia, and we weren't going to get back to Australia. And the land borders into Azerbaijan were also closed. So we were looking at having to take a couple of flights, and that really wasn't part of the plan. So instead we did a complete sort of U-turn and had a look at the map and had a complete change of plan, and decided to go back to Africa. And we flew to Kigali in Rwanda, and then we traveled through Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and then down south all the way to Cape Town. So Kigali to Cape Town. And so the book is about the journey and, talks about the places we visited, but also the people we met and the experiences we had along the way. But it's also about the sort of transformational journey that Joe and I went through emotionally. As I said, I set off reluctantly. I felt like I was following him on his adventure. We came back very much together and determined that we were going to try and build some of the lessons from the journey into our lives going forwards, and also with the sort of shared vision to return to Africa to live and work one day, as well as to have more similar cycling adventures. So it really was a transformational journey.
And you just fell in love with Africa, which I think was latent inside you because you had wanted to work there and that hadn't worked out. So it was like the one that got away or something. Is there, and I know there's a lot, but is there like one scene in the book that you could share with us that kind of epitomizes like the cultural experiences that you had?
Yes. And so as you say, like I'd always wanted to travel to Africa. I never thought it would be on a bike. And I think, I think what was interesting as well, because I think Joe had never really thought about traveling in Africa, but we both love Morocco. And I think after traveling for so long across Europe and through Turkey. We were then brave enough to go to Africa, and in terms of a sort of pivotal experience that describes it, it's really hard to pinpoint one, but I think like the section I read last night, which was basically about when we were riding through the Queen Elizabeth National Park, and we went into this small fishing village, and we were cycling through this village, and there's music playing from all of the different shops. They're sort of competing with each other for space. And then we cycled past this Rastafarian who was playing his own radio, and the song came to an end, and he just went, "And this is Africa." And I just had like goosebumps all over my skin. And the smell of the sort of fish cooking, you know, on the fires in the street, and the chatter of the people, and the music, and just all of the different scenes. Oh, and then there was the warthogs. There was the family of warthogs, which, I mean, if we've all seen them on the movies, but to see them in real is something else. And the babies are just so cute, the way they run along with their noses in the air. So we went past this family of warthogs, and that was really special, except for then Joe just sung Hakuna Matata for the rest of the day, which is...
How can you not? I also love, because there's a bit of a running joke where you were scared of a bunny in the beginning, and just
right. Yeah.
And then you get to the point where you're camping and you can hear was it hippos munching grass and things outside?
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't have slept.
We literally heard hippos sort of munching grass outside the tent, and we could hear the lions. So we were camping on an island in the middle of the Zambezi River, and the lions were across the river on the mainland, but our guides told us they could have crossed over if they'd wanted to. So we could hear the lions, and there were hippos literally munching grass outside the tents, and I just fell asleep like a baby contentedly, whereas before I'd been awake for every single sound. So
this appetite changed a lot on the journey.
Yeah, you just get used to it, and spending, I mean, your respect for nature and the natural world and wild animals increases, but you also become more comfortable as you learn how to navigate and understand better what their boundaries are, and what you need to do in order to live more harmoniously with them. But you never let your guard down.
No. And I've also found the waterfalls situation really scary. I found that quite terrifying to read, because with the tourists, they were just being foolish. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Yes, Jess, that was quite hard to write about, actually, because I think if I'm honest, I felt a little bit embarrassed that we got ourselves into that sort of situation where we just went on this tour, and it was a tour of the Victoria Falls, but where you go to this place called the Devil's Pools, and it's on the edge of Victoria Falls. And I had in my mind, and I've seen on the photo, this like beautiful natural sort of infinity pool on the edge of Victoria Falls. It's absolutely spectacular. The pictures are all great, but I think when we got there, it was just the waters were just too high, and we were absolutely terrified. And we were with some other Asian tourists who seemed completely fearless. And Joe and I are both really good swimmers, and these people couldn't really swim at all. And yet they were, like trying to swim across the edge of the falls, and the guides were running to stop them going over. And then they were lowering themselves into what was the Devil's Pool. And there was really nothing to hold on to. And I mean, the pictures of Joe and I are quite amusing, because we just look terrified, whereas these young Asian people just think they're just like doing Superman poses over the edge of the pools, and we're just like, get us out of here. And look, the key thing there is that, tourists are going on these trips for thrills, but the guides are doing it because it's the only way that they can make enough money to feed the family, and they're really risking their lives day in, day out in order to do this. Although hopefully it's not, the conditions aren't always as bad. I think we were there at the end of the season, and I know they stopped doing that trip shortly afterwards for the end of the season.
Oh my gosh. You did not set out on the trip with an intention to write a book. So what prompted you to write a book?
So no, I didn't set off I kept a journal, and actually the journaling and writing up was really important to me. So just one of the challenges when we first went, I mean, I'm a public health professor and sort of was leading a team of people, and then to give all that up and go away and find that Jo was like really much better than planning and really got ahead of me on everything, and I was like going, am I just going to spend this whole year just following you around? But then I got really into writing and documenting the trip, and that became, my role. That was what I did. I took the photos, I documented the trip, and that gave me a real sense of purpose. Then when I came back, I was like, I promised my mum a coffee table book with all the photos. And so I was thinking of how can I print out the photos with some extracts from my journal. And I started looking online for how to do this. And I came across a book coach. First one wasn't you, but they said, no, sounds like you need to talk to Jessica Mudder. She's an awesome person and she's just set up a company. And so I contacted you and you persuaded me to write a memoir. And it feels a little bit like the journey just continued from that point. And really writing the book was like a continuation of the adventure. It meant Jo and I got to relive the journey day by day as I progressed through the year in the book. And we both really enjoyed the process of that, although sometimes I think he was like, can we just stop? But most of the time he enjoyed talking about it as well. So thank you, Jessica, because it's really been a joy working with you on this book. I'm almost a little bit sad that it feels like it's coming to an end.
Yeah, because I think we did 6 or 8 coaching sessions last year. So the company was only like 3 months old or something. And you went away and did the work like at 5 a.m., which really impressed me. And we would have periodic catch-ups, and you just continued and continued and continued, and to the point that you almost had 90,000 words. And then we began, the publishing has probably been 3 months, I think. And we've been working even more closely together. So it will be strange not to be in contact daily.
No, I know. Well, I'm sure we'll have future projects to work on. But I think what was you're right. Those initial coaching sessions were fantastic for me. But I think also I remember thinking I had a crisis of confidence in Croatia, which where I just could not get that chapter to string together, and it was really good to be able to come back to you then as well and get your advice on how to take things forward. So I've really enjoyed the process. I think you said, and I mean, do you still feel like at one stage you said to me, this is like a little bit of a hybrid book in that it's sort of a mix between memoir style and travel log style? Is that still how you see the book?
It is definitely. It's definitely squarely sits in travel memoir, which is, as we know, what I love too, where you're the vehicle telling the story, and we want to know your interior journey, because that's, but it is so fascinating because the cultural stuff is, quite often breathtaking. Like I've only been to Morocco. So I think you add that plus then your insights as a professor of public health. So it's deeper, but without being overly analytical. It's just really the human story. So it's got the lot.
And that for me, I mean, one of the things we were discussing last night was, and one of the things that Jo was surprised about, was the way I managed to leave behind my work completely in the first half of the trip. But certainly once we got to Africa, that was really challenging because we were cycling past places and talking to people who are really experiencing complex public health challenges. And so it was impossible not to think about those and not to reflect on them. But also one of the things that, and again, we did not set out to do this, but we ended up staying at a lot of community projects. For example, Windy Community Guest House in Uganda, which is linked to the community hospital, which serves all of the local community. And actually by staying in the guest house, you're funding the hospital. And there were lots of medical interns and other academics actually staying there. And we got to talk to them about the work that they were doing there and form a sort of ongoing link with that project and many other projects that we visited. And that was really enriching I think for me, as somebody who'd sort of set off traveling thinking I probably need a bigger purpose, but wasn't sure what it was. And I think towards the end, that was as realizing that actually that was why we were there. And it really reignited my passion to go and live and work in Africa. So not quite sure yet how that's going to happen, but it's something that we're working towards.
That's exciting. I also liked, because I have traveled widely, but never by bicycle. And there's a bit where you guys are forced to hire a car, and you didn't like it because you were suddenly there was a window between you and the people, whereas I just never thought about it. When you're cycling, yeah, you are on the tracks and people are right next to you on the road, which for me would be a bit intimidating. But that was a real joy, wasn't it? The interactions that you had all along the way.
It was a real joy. And look, it is a little intimidating because I think what it does is it makes you vulnerable. By putting yourself in a car above the people with everything closed off, you're shutting yourself off and you're looking down on people. Whereas being on a bicycle, you're there among the people and you're vulnerable, and that opens up conversations and dialogue that you wouldn't otherwise have, and a whole wealth of experiences. So I think, we did find it hard to travel in a car after that. And we would always want to do more traveling by bicycle because of that vulnerability, and that, which means that you're much more likely to meet people and interact with people and experience things that you wouldn't otherwise do. So it's a wonderful way to travel. And it keeps you fit, and it's environmentally friendly. So there's so many ticks to traveling by bicycle.
But it takes a special type of person, which you and Joe are. I was talking to Joe's sister last night, and she was like, "No, I'm not a biker. I haven't got that gene or something." And I'm just glad I can read books because it's armchair travel. Now, this is your debut as an author. You have written many sort of academic texts, but as a memoirist, this is your first. So what was the biggest challenge that you faced?
So the biggest challenge for me, I think, was, first of all, sort of switching to that style of memoir writing. But I read a couple of memoirs, including your own travel memoir, Home in Myanmar, which is just a wonderful book, Jessica. And then also, I mentioned yesterday, Rebecca Lowe's book, The Slow Road to Tehran. So reading those two books helped me to sort of switch my way of thinking in terms of how I wrote. So that was a challenge. But then the second biggest challenge was knowing what to leave out. There was so much material and there was so many things I want to write about. And Joe as well, he's still going, but what about this? You didn't say this. And so that was the biggest challenge, knowing what to leave out. And for every chapter that we've got, there's at least another 3 or 4 we probably could have written.
Yeah. Do you know the way that I felt the same about Myanmar, that having to kill your darlings, and you really don't want to when you've lived through it, but it doesn't relate back to the kind of overarching purpose of the book. It is totally random, someone might think. Now, the way I see it is that when I'm doing an interview like this, it is actually exclusive content, and I can say, well, this is not in the book, but, and then I can, and then I feel like, oh, I've shared that bit.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think there's a lot of different parts like that.
Now, just to give you as an understanding, you actually started the journey in Europe after Morocco, but something didn't feel right, and that's when you changed course. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so I think we started in Morocco, up in Spain, and then we got as far as Turkey, traveling east. And I mean, Turkey, I was really looking forward to Turkey. I think what happened was Morocco was so enriching culturally, and it was challenging, but it was challenging in a good way. And then Europe, we loved Europe, but it was a little bit like being on holiday on a bike, and we'd been to a lot of those places before. So it was very different. The Balkans was super interesting because we hadn't been to a lot of those countries, and understanding the history and relearning. You find you're relearning things that you did know at one stage, but you haven't thought about for a long time. So that was really good. But then Turkey, I think a lot of things happened. It got too hot. We were there when it was a busy tourist time. And we were on a deadline to try and meet up with Jessie and Isabella, who were there last night. So Joe's son and girlfriend, who were coming to meet us in Istanbul, which was really fabulous. But it meant we were sort of on a timeline, and we just got, so we were exhausted, and it was too hot and it was too busy, and we couldn't find good places to stay, and we really weren't having a good time in Turkey, to the extent to which and I'm still sort of so ashamed of this, we cycled straight past Ephesus because we were just too exhausted to go and have a look around. So this very famous sort of cultural site that we just cycled straight past because we were too tired. And so, and I think part of the issue was also that we'd sort of lost our sense of direction completely, because we didn't know how we were going to continue the journey after that. We didn't, and as it turned out, we couldn't get visas for China, which meant that the rest of the journey was just getting too complicated. So we'd already started thinking maybe we'll go somewhere else. And then when we got to Istanbul and the visa office said, we went to the Chinese embassy and just got turned away. You know, they said, no, you have to go back to Australia. And we were completely dejected. But that was when we started having a rethink and looking at the map and thinking about where we want to go. And I mean, it's hard to believe that actually Africa had the most green and yellow, so that's completely safe to travel, or you know, exercise a degree of caution, but otherwise basically safe. And it had the most green and yellow than any other continent, provided that we missed out Ethiopia and Sudan and flew into Rwanda. So that was why we decided to go back there. We'd had such an amazing time in Morocco, and it was the best decision.
It's so amazing, isn't it? You have to thank for this. You have a surly Chinese embassy official who denied your visa. Because I'm surprised, because I've applied for Chinese visas out of China. You've got Australian passports, British. You've probably got British too.
That's right.
It's a strange thing that they wouldn't let you apply. But
no,
look, with that roll of the dice, your whole life has changed.
No, that's right. And you know, and I think, you know, in a way we were sort of jokingly saying, well, stuff you then, China, we'll go to Africa, you know. And
personal at the time.
It turned out to be a really good place to travel, and we absolutely want to go back there. We'd love, you know, we didn't see any of West Africa, so we'd love to go back there. Joe said he had a dream the other day, and we just given up our jobs again, and we'd moved to Cape Town. so I think it's very much in both of our plans, and really for me, I think, you know, I had always wanted to go to Africa. Joe had never thought about it, but he was like a duck to water in Africa. It really, really suited him. He just loved the color and the music and the people. He was actually really good at trying to pick up the local languages and try and converse with people in the local languages. So I loved to see him thrive in that sort of environment.
So there's more to come. There's way more travel to come. Now, on this journey, you traveled 18,000 kilometers on some seriously steep, unsealed and hairy roads. In terms of the endurance, and I know people get quite fixated on this, was there some moments that were really hard? And if so, how did you overcome them?
So there were absolutely some moments that were really hard, and each time we said, let's not do that again. And each time we did, because the reality is, to get to the really cool removed places, you have to take the tough roads. So we ended up doing it again and again, despite our better judgment. So and that was, you know, we did quite a lot of off-roading in Europe, but more so in Africa. And I think, you know, the first sort of really off-road route that we did was the Congo Nile Trail, which is if you look at bikepacking.com, they've got an article on it, and it describes it as like one of the toughest sort of mountain bike rides, but really spectacular, going through all the sort of tea plantations and beautiful views. So, but we weren't on mountain bikes, we were on fully loaded touring bikes. So it wasn't just challenging, it was kind of completely impossible in some parts. And I think we got about 2.3 kilometers in to one ride of 100-kilometer sort of 3-day ride when we went, oh no, what have we done? But then we discovered that actually we weren't the first people to do this, and the local kids had cottoned on that there's a little bit of money to be made from helping stranded cyclists to push their bikes up hills, or even in some cases carry bikes across the rivers. So we'd be cycling along like down a hill, and then all of a sudden somebody would start running along beside you, and you're like, oh, they're just being friendly and wanting to chat, and they'd be chatting to you, and then after a while you're like, they're running for a long way, there must be something in it for them. And then before you knew it, you'd hit a riverbank and there was a sheer drop, and you're going, oh, how are we going to get across here? And they would say, oh, I can help you if you like. And they'd pick up your bike and you'd follow them across the river, and they know exactly where to cross. So, and I think I joke in the book that, initially I was very reluctant to give money to kids, because I mean, in all seriousness, you have to think twice about it, because it's potentially taking people out of school. But after a while, I embraced the child labour as the only means of survival in that sort of situation.
Yeah, there are situations where there isn't really a viable alternative, and you do have to be pragmatic, I think. Look, that's business innovation at its best. I love it.
That's absolutely right. And we were like, it's a two-way transaction. We need the service, and they need the money.
In fact, they could have commanded a really high price, because what were you going to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we were happy to pay a really high price. So,
now travel books often, they start off, we've got the eat, pray, love situation where, her life is unraveled and she flees, and it's almost a trope, I think, for travel stories. But I love that you and Joe had full lives, amazing lives, and you traveled for the sake of adventure, not to kind of evade anything or sort yourselves out or anything like that. Would you encourage other people to take a middle-age gap year for no other reason than the adventure of it?
Yeah, for sure. I should point out that my friends are a bit upset that you made me call it a middle-aged gap year. They're like, we're not middle-aged. I'm like, we are actually middle-aged.
I proposed that subtitle to you and you never blinked. And because I think that's the selling point of the book. But some people might be like, I'll never be middle-aged. Do you know what I mean?
But we're middle-aged, and we should be proud.
I'm middle-aged.
And no, that's absolutely right. So I would absolutely encourage people to do the same. But the reality is, not everybody's in a position to take a whole year off. We were, Joe had his kids when he was very young, and they'd left home and were living both living on their own. We'd both been in our jobs for quite a long time, so had long service leave. So it's about what you can do in terms of your circumstances. So not everybody can be in a position to take a whole year off, but I would absolutely encourage people to think about what they can do. And it's so easy to fall back into routine and busyness, and that's what we were really frightened of coming back as well, of getting sort of sucked back into that busyness of everyday life, where you're so busy that you don't have time to dream and think about, those bigger ideas, or those bigger, not necessarily even challenges, but more meaningful things that you really want to do, as opposed to just ticking off the tasks of cooking and cleaning and going to work every day. So it's about what you can do, whatever age you are. It's about sort of thinking about what more you can do with your life to make it more meaningful and full, I guess, without taking on too much.
Okay. To me, your expertise as a public health professor gives the book this extra level of insights that you don't get in many travel memoirs. I was wondering if you could share a public health challenge facing one of the communities that you were in, and how you think of it for us who would be completely unfamiliar with the situation.
Yes, and I think the obvious one that springs to mind, that there are a lot, but the issue of charcoal and climate change, I think, is one that really struck us as we were traveling through East Africa, and particularly sort of Malawi and Zambia. But it was also in Tanzania and some of the other countries. So most of the majority of people in those countries, and I think 70-80% are still cooking using charcoal stoves. That's their main source of fuel. But a lot of that charcoal is produced illegally. And that's because people have no other source of livelihood. And so we were cycling past signs for forestry conservation areas, and where women were running from behind the signs with huge bundles of wood on their heads, and in some cases also carrying children on their backs. And when I say huge bundles, these would be weighing 40 kilos or more.
Wow.
And they're running in bare feet with kids strapped to their backs to take this wood to somewhere where it can then be turned into charcoal. We saw men on bicycles like us. Joe was carrying 50 kilos on his bike. These guys had like 50 kilo bags of charcoal strapped to the bike on wooden frames. And one tumble, and the sort of potential for injury and even death was really, really high. So, but the people are forced into these sort of lifestyles because there's no other opportunities for them, and because there's demand for that charcoal is very high. And obviously, the charcoal is contributing to having a negative climate impact, but it's their only source of food for cooking. So it's sort of a cyclical contributing to worse climate change, but then is also necessary part of people's lives. So that was the one challenge which I think really needs some innovative solutions. I didn't think of any while I was cycling along, but it's something I wrote about in the book and something I'd love to do more research on.
You celebrated your 50th birthday while you're on the road. How do you think? Huh?
I think it was 52.
Oh, was it 52?
52,
okay.
Yeah.
And it was the night, and you were very tired. You didn't end up going dancing. I remember that.
That's right. Yeah.
How do you think this adventure would have been different and your book would have been different if you'd set off when you were in your mid-20s?
Yeah, it's really hard to know. I think for us, I think in your mid-20s, you've still got a lot more angst and insecurity, and you've got your whole life ahead of you, which you still need to work out. So I think in some ways you're more loose and fancy free, but in other ways it's harder. I think traveling at our age, I felt like we we're in that lucky position to have, even jobs to come back to and homes and feel sort of reasonably financially secure. And that was really helpful for us. So, and I think we probably were much more interested in people as well, and meeting people from the different countries and learning about their lives and their experiences. So yeah, it's hard to say because every 20-year-old is different as well. So, but based on my own experience, that would be the key difference, is that sort of financial security and having a home to come back to, and being more mature in terms of our interest in understanding other cultures would be the key things.
It's a bit wiser.
A bit wiser, yeah.
Yeah, we'd all like to think so. Otherwise, kind of, what's the point of life?
Right.
You went to some really beautiful, naturally beautiful places. Is there one that would be a favorite, or is that too hard to decide?
That's really hard to survive, but to decide. But I think the one that really sticks in my mind, and potentially because it came towards the end of the trip, was the Namibian desert. And again, I was saying before, often the most challenging journeys or parts of the journey are where you get the most rewards, and certainly cycling through the Namibian desert was almost impossible. But just the sheer beauty of the vastness and the colours and the changing lights and the starry nights when you haven't got any other lights there, as well as the animals. We got to know a lot about different types of antelopes when we were there, and watching the sort of antelopes at night time come to the watering holes, or sort of bounce across the sand in the early morning sun was just really spectacular. So Namibia really made its mark on me, and I think it's a place where a lot of people would really enjoy.
How are how's the sand for cycling in Namibia?
Yeah, really, really tough. So, I mean, cycling through sand on a touring bike is never a good idea. So we had sand, we had corrugations, which is where the cars traveling along the roads has caused ridges.
Yeah.
You won't notice it in a car, it might be just a little bit bumpy, but in a bicycle it's just completely impossible to ride. So, and then just to top it all, we had some really horrendous headwinds. So when you're cycling, like, you know, you're always wanting a tailwind, so the wind pushes you from behind. But in Namibia at one stage we got this horrendous headwind, and we were trying to go on sand. Some of it was uphill, and then we had a headwind, and we were traveling so slowly we thought we would never make it. And that was the same time, because it was taking us so much longer than we'd planned, that we ran out of food and water, and were having to flag cars down to help us. But the cars did help us, which was also fabulous. We made some really cool connections, like just by flagging cars down along the road.
I would have been having tanties and stomping my foot and giving up. Can you please tell us about Olivia, who was very special to you and Joe?
Yes, and is still very special to Joe and I. So Olivia was a young intern that we met. We were staying at the Africa Rising Cycling Centre, which is where they train Team Rwanda, the cycling team. And he was interning there and met us and showed us to our room. And then we were looking to go on a tour of the area, and the hotel people just said, why don't you, instead of paying, just go with Olivia? He's you know, wants to learn and get some opportunities. So we went on a tour with Olivia, and he took us to the headquarters of the national park and around the nearby town, and we got to know him sort of during this time, and as part of that, sort of learnt that actually he wanted to be a tour guide, but he couldn't qualify because he hadn't finished school, and he just had 1 year left at school. But the person who'd been paying for him to finish school had got into trouble with a few things and could no longer play, and therefore he couldn't finish school. And he never asked us for money, and I don't think that was his intention at all. But Joe and I both were just went away, and later that evening said, you know, we'd asked him how much it was, and we were like, actually we could pay that money. And in fact, it wasn't just that we'd been planning to do a hike the next day to one of the volcanoes where we thought we might have the chance to see gorillas. And actually the cost of the hike for both of us was the same as the cost of Olivia's school fees for one term. And I was like, I can't do the hike if we don't pay the school fees. And Joe's like, no, I agree, we should pay. And so we agreed to cover the costs. And yeah, Olivia was just absolutely made up. And then he took us, or we went together to the gorilla naming festival the next day, and I'll just never remember how overjoyed he was. And so he finished school, we've stayed in touch, he messages us every week letting us know how he's going, and we since sort of continued to providing a small amount of support, because if not, then, and what he was doing at the time was being forced to work for like less than $1 a day just so that they can feed the family. And so we kind of provide him with a little bit of money, which means he doesn't have to do that $1 a day work, and instead can get work experience. And he's now at university, and we're supporting him to go to university and study tourism. And I think he's just doing so well. And it's an absolute pleasure. It's really enriched our lives. I mean, we really just feel like we have another family member now.
He and I are now connected on Instagram, and we've messaged, and he tells me how great you guys are. And it's like, it's so cool that now I know him too. So
yeah,
he's what a book can do. He's so gregarious.
No, that's right. And already I've had one person who I put the picture of him was in one of the posts that I did, and I think I also put it on there's a Cairo to Cape Town WhatsApp group. And already somebody contacted me and went, "That's Olivia. We know Olivia. We love it. You know, we met Olivia when we were traveling, and the family fell in love with him." So,
kind of person.
Yeah, he's a special kind of person, and we're really happy that we decided to support him. He thanks us all the time, and we're like, "Olivia, you're doing this yourself. You know, you're doing the work. You're putting yourself out there." The support we're giving is a very small amount, but for him it's absolutely
life-changing.
And as I said, for us it brings us a lot of pleasure being able to help him.
That's wonderful. Well, my final question for you, Jacqui, is what is next for Jacqui Webster?
What is next for Jacqui Webster? This is the I mean, it's hard to know. I feel I've still got more to do on this book in terms of, you know, working out the rest of the publishing process in terms of marketing and everything else. I'm already sort of started writing my next short story, which is relates to sort of a health issue I had recently. I'm not ready to talk about that in much detail at this stage, but I think I'm finding the process of writing about that really therapeutic, and really enriching as well. And then I think my current contract at work is funded for 3.5 years, and then Joe and I are really keen to think about whether or not we might go traveling again at that stage, if not before, because we're itching to do something similar. So I think there's more, and also one of the things that we want to do is to use the funds from this book to support health and education projects in Africa. So we are thinking about maybe setting up a charity, or potentially linking with existing charities to see how we can support other health and education projects in Africa. So it's another good reason for people to buy the book.
It is a fantastic reason. Also that it's a fantastic book, Two Bugs on Bikes by Jacqui Webster. Congratulations again, Jacqui.
Thank you, Jessica, and lovely talking to you.